The morning sunlight cast long shadows across Maple Grove's meticulously manicured lawns, but Jake Thompson's mood was anything but peaceful. He stood motionless by his front window, fingers clenched around his steaming coffee mug, watching Diane Hartwell, the neighborhood's notorious HOA president everyone simply called Karen, make her daily rounds. For months, Jake had tolerated her increasingly bizarre behavior. What started as passive-aggressive comments about his lawn's grass length had escalated into a full-blown vendetta. But today was different. Today, Jake had concrete proof of her most egregious violation yet. His mailbox, a vintage cast iron piece he'd inherited from his grandfather, had become Karen's personal hunting ground. Packages would mysteriously disappear. Important letters would arrive suspiciously opened. When he confronted her during the last HOA meeting, she'd smile that tight, artificial smile that made his skin crawl. "Documentation, Mr. Thompson," she'd said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Without proof, these are merely accusations." Jake knew documentation was exactly what he needed. A former cybersecurity specialist who now ran his own digital security consulting firm, gathering evidence was second nature to him. For the past 3 weeks, he'd been meticulously collecting digital and physical proof of Karen's mail interceptions. The final straw had come last Tuesday, a critical contract from a potential million-dollar client. The government cybersecurity tender had vanished. Jake had tracked the package's digital trail, confirming it had been delivered. Yet when he checked his mailbox, nothing. The tracking information showed it had been signed for by a D. Hartwell at precisely 11:37 a.m. His laptop screen flickered with multiple surveillance app windows, each capturing different angles of his mailbox and the surrounding area. Motion-activated cameras, GPS tracking chips hidden in decoy packages, and a custom-built cellular signal interceptor Jake had designed himself were all part of his reconnaissance setup. Today, he wasn't just going to catch Karen. He was going to expose her in a way that would make the entire neighborhood sit up and take notice. The neighborhood of Maple Grove looked peaceful from the outside. Rows of identical two-story houses with perfectly trimmed hedges and matching mailboxes. But beneath that pristine exterior simmered a cauldron of passive-aggressive tensions, unspoken rivalries, and tightly controlled chaos. Jake's fingers traced the edge of a manila folder sitting on his desk. Inside were printed screenshots, timestamped videos, and meticulously organized documentation. Each page was a piece of a puzzle that would soon reveal the true nature of Karen Hartwell. He glanced at his watch, 9:43 a.m., right on schedule. A black Mercedes SUV with personalized HOA-1 license plates pulled into the cul-de-sac. Karen was making her morning patrol, clipboard in hand, ready to find some minor infraction to write up. Little did she know the hunter was about to become the hunted. Jake allowed himself a small, determined smile. This wasn't just about mail anymore. This was about standing up to a neighborhood bully who had made it her mission to control every single aspect of residents' lives. And he was going to enjoy every single moment of what was coming next. The trap was set. All he needed was for Karen to take the bait. Jake's home office looked more like a mission control center than a typical suburban workspace. 3 large monitors displayed a complex array of digital surveillance feeds, each screen divided into multiple quadrants showing different angles of his mailbox, driveway, and the street. Specialized equipment that would make most cybersecurity professionals drool was carefully arranged across his custom-built desk. His best friend and former military intelligence colleague, Marcus Rodriguez, leaned against the doorframe, a half-eaten energy bar in his hand. "You're taking this way too personally, Jake," he said, watching his friend manipulate multiple screens with practiced ease. "This stopped being personal the moment she started intercepting my business mail," Jake responded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Those contract proposals weren't just pieces of paper. They were potentially life-changing opportunities for my company." Marcus knew Jake's backstory. After leaving a high-profile cybersecurity firm 2 years ago, Jake had started his own consultancy. Each contract was a lifeline, each proposal a potential breakthrough. The missed government tender wasn't just a setback, it was a potential career killer. "So what's the plan?" Marcus asked, moving closer to the screens. "And please tell me it's something that won't get you arrested." Jake pulled up a schematic that looked like something between an electrical diagram and a mailbox blueprint. "Phase 1 is gathering irrefutable proof," he explained. "I've designed a custom package with multiple tracking and recording devices. When Karen takes the bait, she won't even realize she's being documented." The device was ingenious. A seemingly ordinary manila envelope containing a fake government contract it was equipped with. A micro GPS tracker smaller than a postage stamp. A voice-activated micro recorder. A near-invisible ink tag that would transfer to anyone handling the package. A cellular signal interceptor that would log any digital interactions. "This is borderline surveillance state stuff," Marcus muttered, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. Jake's lips quirked into a sardonic smile. "She started this war. I'm just fighting back with the tools I know best. The plan was methodical. Jake would plant the decoy package in his mailbox, positioned perfectly to be tempting to Karen's notorious mail-stealing habits. Every interaction would be recorded, tracked, and documented. If she took the bait, and Jake was almost certain she would, he'd have the evidence needed to not just prove her mail theft, but potentially get her removed from her HOA presidency. Marcus shook his head. The HOA is going to lose their minds when they see this. Good, Jake replied, his voice cold and determined. It's time someone stood up to neighborhood tyrants like Karen. Outside, the quiet suburban street remained unchanged. Perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, a veneer of normalcy that masked the brewing storm of suburban warfare. The trap was ready. All Jake needed now was for Karen to make her move. The next morning arrived with a razor-sharp precision that matched Jake's carefully laid plans. He positioned the decoyed package in his mailbox at exactly 7:15 a.m., the time Karen typically made her morning reconnaissance of the neighborhood. From his home office, Jake watched multiple screens, his fingers hovering near the keyboard. The micro cameras mounted near the mailbox provided crystal-clear views from 3 different angles. Each screen was a window into his meticulously planned operation. At 9:42 a.m., her usual time, Karen's black Mercedes SUV rolled into view. Jake leaned forward, muscles tense, watching her familiar routine. She walked with the practiced swagger of someone who believed they were above the rules, clipboard in hand, pearl necklace glinting in the morning sun. The moment was surreal. Jake had spent weeks studying her patterns, analyzing her movements, preparing for this exact scenario. As Karen approached his mailbox, he felt the strange mixture of anticipation and vindication. She glanced around, habit he'd noticed in previous surveillance, always checking if anyone was watching. But this time, Jake was watching. Every single move. With practiced stealth, Karen opened his mailbox. Her hand reached inside, fingers closing around the manila envelope Jake had so carefully prepared. The micro GPS tracker inside began transmitting immediately, recording her location, the time, her movements. Jake's pulse quickened. This was it. The voice-activated recorder captured every rustle of paper, every whispered mutter. He watched as Karen quickly tucked the envelope into her oversized designer bag, her movements practiced and quick. It was clear this wasn't her first time intercepting mail. Got you, Jake whispered. Marcus, who had been monitoring a secondary system, raised an eyebrow. She took the bait faster than we expected. The tracking data began streaming in. The GPS showed Karen's vehicle moving away from Jake's street, heading towards the local coffee shop where HOA board members often met. Jake began preparing the next phase of his plan, compilation, and documentation of the evidence. What Karen didn't know was that this was more than just a simple trap. This was a carefully orchestrated digital sting operation designed to expose not just her mail theft, but the broader culture of intimidation she cultivated in the neighborhood. Jake opened a secure folder on his computer, beginning to organize the evidence. Timestamps, geolocation data, audio recordings, visual documentation. Each piece of evidence was a weapon in his arsenal, carefully collected and meticulously preserved. The suburban morning continued its peaceful facade. Sprinklers hissed. Gardeners trimmed hedges. But beneath this tranquil surface, a storm was brewing, and Jake Thompson was about to unleash it. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, a sterile building that looked more like a municipal bunker than a gathering place. Jake arrived precisely at 6:45 p.m., a leather messenger bag clutched tightly under his arm. Marcus had tried to talk him out of a public confrontation, but Jake was beyond reasoning. Inside the meeting room, Karen sat at the head of the long table, her perfectly pressed blazer and immaculate makeup a stark contrast to the growing tension in the room. Other HOA board members shuffled papers, unaware of the storm about to break. Jake took a seat in the back, his eyes never leaving Karen. The room was filled with the usual suspects, retired couples, work-from-home professionals, and neighborhood busybodies who lived for these monthly gatherings. Little did they know this meeting would be anything but routine. When the meeting officially began, Karen droned on about landscaping regulations and upcoming community events. Jake waited, his patience a coiled spring ready to release. Before we conclude, he interrupted, standing up slowly. I have a matter that requires the board's immediate attention. Whispers rippled through the room. Karen's smile froze, a practiced, artificial expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice saccharine and sweet, this is not the time for. Jake was already walking to the front of the room, pulling a laptop from his bag. With a few precise clicks, the room's large projection screen came to life. What followed was a meticulously compiled presentation of evidence, GPS tracking logs, timestamped video footage, audio recordings clearly capturing Karen intercepting his mail, bank statements showing missed contract opportunities. Each piece of evidence was more damning than the last. The room went dead silent. He detailed how Karen had systematically intercepted his business mail over the past 6 months, how she'd cost him potential contracts, how she'd abused her position of power in the HOA to wage a personal vendetta. An elderly woman in the front row gasped. A middle-aged man muttered, "Good Lord." Karen's perfectly composed facade began to crack. Her fingers, adorned with an expensive ring, gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "These are baseless accusations," she sputtered, but her voice lacked its previous confidence. Jake wasn't finished. His final slide showed a comprehensive breakdown of similar complaints against Karen from other neighborhood residents, complaints that had been quietly suppressed over the years. The room was electric with tension. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Years of Karen's tyrannical behavior were being exposed in excruciating detail. "I'm not just asking for an investigation," Jake said, his voice calm and deadly precise. "I'm demanding her immediate removal from the HOA board." A collective murmur rose from the crowd. Some nodded. Others looked shocked. But no one, absolutely no one, was looking at Karen the same way they had when the meeting began. The trap had been sprung, and Jake Thompson had just changed the dynamics of Maple Grove forever. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was nothing short of a neighborhood earthquake. Within 48 hours, Jake's carefully compiled evidence had spread through Maple Grove like wildfire, shared in hushed conversations over backyard fences and heated group texts. Karen Hartwell's carefully constructed reputation lay in ruins. The local news picked up the story, painting a picture of systemic mail theft and HOA corruption that sent shockwaves through the community. Investigative reporters descended on Maple Grove, digging deeper into Karen's past behaviors and uncovering a trail of similar incidents in previous neighborhoods. Jake found himself an unexpected hero. Neighbors who had previously been too afraid to speak out began sharing their own stories. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 streets over revealed how Karen had blocked her home renovation plans for years. The Petersons showed documentation of repeated fines for minor, often imaginary infractions. Marcus arrived at Jake's house 3 days after the meeting, a 6-pack of craft beer in hand. "You realize you've become the neighborhood legend, right?" he said, dropping onto Jake's living room couch. Jake looked tired but satisfied. "This was never about becoming a hero," he responded, accepting a beer. "This was about stopping a bully." The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Without Karen's intimidating presence, they conducted a swift internal investigation. The evidence Jake presented was supplemented by additional complaints that had been suppressed for years. Within a week, Karen was not just removed from her position, she was banned from serving on any HOA board in the county. But Jake knew the battle wasn't completely over. Legal proceedings loomed. The postal inspector's office had become involved, investigating the multiple instances of mail theft. Jake's meticulous documentation provided them with a clear trail of evidence that went beyond just his personal experience. His cybersecurity firm began receiving calls. Clients were impressed by the methodical way he had gathered and presented evidence. What had started as a personal vendetta was transforming into a potential business opportunity, consulting on personal evidence gathering and digital security. The morning after the news broke, Jake found an unexpected visitor at his door. A representative from the county's Consumer Protection Office wanted to discuss his case, suggesting it could become a landmark example of how individuals can fight back against abuse of power. Maple Grove would never be the same. The perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes now held a different story. A story of resistance, of standing up to tyranny, of one man's determination to expose the truth. Karen Hartwell's reign of terror was over, and Jake Thompson had been the one to bring it down.